My name is Emma. I am a 24 years old and I live in a house that has never really felt like home. That evening, I stood in the narrow kitchen, stirring a pot of vegetable soup, trying to stretch out the last of the groceries until the week ended. I was distracted my mind, circling student loans, unpaid bills, and the hopeless search for a stable job. In that distraction, I forgot something so simple it felt meaningless. At first, I did not add salt to the soup. A small mistake in most homes, a laughable oversight, but in this house, small mistakes were treated like crimes. Harold Carter. My stepfather came into the kitchen in his usual pressed work shirt, his sleeves rolled up, the smell of expensive aftershave clinging to him. He dropped into his chair at the table and demanded dinner. My hands shook as I placed the bowl before him, silently praying he would not notice. He lifted the spoon, took a sip, and his face twisted into contempt. "What is this, Emma?" he growled, his voice filling the kitchen. "This is tasteless garbage." Before I could form an apology, he grabbed the bowl and hurled it straight at me. The broth scalded my cheek and chin, burning hot, while shards of porcelain exploded on the tile floor. The shock was instant. I screamed, clutching my face, tears welling up as the skin began to blister. My heart raced so loudly I could barely hear the bowl shatter. My mother Donna rushed in from the living room, her eyes wide with horror as she saw me crouched on the ground. For 1 second, I saw in her face the mother who wanted to protect me, but fear froze her. She whispered my name but did not challenge her husband. Instead, she fetched a towel and pressed it gingerly to my cheek, her hands trembling so badly that the cloth barely touched me. In the doorway stood Madison Harold's daughter, arms folded across her chest, a faint smirk pulling at her lips. She did not speak, but her expression said enough. She enjoyed watching me humiliated, the unwanted stepdaughter punished in her father's house. The sting on my skin was nothing compared to the sting in my chest. I wanted to stand, to shout, to demand respect, but I could not move. My legs felt heavy, rooted to the floor by the weight of reality. I had no money of my own. My student debt was crushing my job search unfruitful. Harold controlled the bank account, the bills, the roof over our heads. If I left with nothing, where would I go? And more importantly, how could I abandon my mother? She was as trapped as I was, a woman who had surrendered her independence years ago, clinging to Harold for financial security. If I walked away, she would face him alone. So I sat there trembling on the cold tile skin, blistering while Harold loomed over me. "This is what happens when you cannot even make soup," he muttered with disdain before striding out of the room. Donna bent to help me up, whispering frantically that I should keep quiet, not cry too loudly, not make things worse. Her fear was a cage that bound us both. I rinsed my face at the sink, the cool water easing the burn for just a moment, and stared at my reflection. My skin was angry red, my eyes swollen with tears, my dignity cracked like the bowl on the floor. Rage churned in me, but so did despair. Rage that he could harm me so casually. Despair that I had no simple escape. My credit score was non-existent, my degree was fresh, my income was zero. No landlord in this city would rent to me without proof of stable work, and Harold knew it. That knowledge gave him power. From the hallway, Madison's voice drifted in, cutting and smug. "Maybe next time try tasting it before you serve it." My fists clenched, but I swallowed my words. That night, I lay in bed, cheek-throbbing, body rigid with shame. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the soup flying toward me, felt the hot sting again. I wanted to believe I was strong, that I could leave tomorrow, but reality pressed down like a weight. Leaving meant debt, homelessness, and abandoning my mother. Staying meant more humiliation, more pain. For now, silence was my only weapon. Still, as I stared into the darkness, I promised myself something. I would not live like this forever. Survival sometimes meant patience. And one day, Harold Carter would learn that even the quietest person in the room can fight back. For now, I endured not because I was weak, but because in a house where even soup could trigger violence, survival was all I had. When I was 8 years old, my father died of a sudden heart attack, leaving my mother and me in a fog of grief and financial insecurity. For years, she worked double shifts at a grocery store, trying to cover the mortgage and keep me in school, but the exhaustion carved deep lines into her face, and her body carried the weight of struggle. Then Harold appeared. He was charming at first, a widower with a steady job in construction management, a man who spoke of stability and providing. My mother, desperate for relief, remarried quickly. She believed Harold would bring safety. What he actually brought was control. Almost immediately after the wedding, he insisted on handling all financial matters. My mother signed papers without question, and Harold's name appeared alongside hers on the deed of the house. He opened joint accounts, and within months, everything flowed through him: paychecks, bills, savings. He told us it was efficient. In truth, it made him the gatekeeper of every dollar. For me, the shift was swift and cruel. I went from being my mother's companion to being labeled an extra mouth. Harold reminded me constantly that I was not his responsibility. He would toss comments across the dinner table, reminding me that food costs money, that lights are not free, that I should be grateful for his generosity. Madison, his biological daughter, never heard those words. For her, there was a new car at 17, designer clothes, a steady allowance. The contrast carved into me daily a reminder that in this house, love and resources flowed one way only. My mother saw it. I know she did, but she swallowed her words. She had developed a habit of silence. Harold's presence calmed her fears of unpaid bills and the threat of foreclosure. In exchange, she gave him her voice. This silence hardened into what experts call battered spouse syndrome, though I did not know the term back then. What I knew was that my mother rarely contradicted Harold, and when she did, her voice trembled like brittle glass. The weight of financial dependence kept her locked to him. For me, the chains were different, but just as heavy. I had just graduated from college degree in hand, but debt shackled me to the ground. My student loans loomed more than $30,000, and every application for work seemed to vanish into silence. Harold knew this. He reminded me often that with no job, no money, and no credit history, I was nothing more than a guest in his house. He relished that power. And so I stayed even as the daily humiliations grew sharper. Every morning I cleaned the kitchen, vacuumed the carpet-folded laundry that was not mine. Madison would stroll past with a smirk, announcing she was meeting friends, her car keys jingling in her hand. Harold would nod approvingly at her independence while sneering at my lack of contribution. It was a cycle designed to erode me, and it worked. My sense of self-worth shrank to the size of the allowance he grudgingly handed me for necessities. Sometimes I fantasized about leaving, about renting a small apartment, even if it meant eating noodles every night. But reality intruded quickly. Without income or a co-signer, no landlord in this city would give me a lease. I thought about shelters, but the shame and fear of abandoning my mother kept me rooted. I could not walk out knowing Harold would unleash his temper fully on her. So each day I played my role. I washed dishes, folded clothes, and pretended the comments did not pierce me. I told myself I was waiting, saving what little I could, hoping for a job offer that might open a door. But Harold sensed my hesitation. He enjoyed reminding me that as long as I lived under his roof, his rules bound me. He said it with pride, as though he had built a kingdom and I was a peasant allowed to stay. My mother's silence confirmed it. She told me in hushed whispers not to provoke him, not to argue that things would get worse if I did. And she was right. His temper always escalated when challenged. That was how I learned the rhythm of abuse, the cycle of tension, explosion, and uneasy calm. It carved itself into our daily lives like clockwork. Looking back, I see how deliberate it was, how each piece of control tightened the trap. Financial dependence, emotional isolation, constant reminders of my supposed worthlessness, all designed to keep me compliant. And though I hated myself for it, I complied. I told myself survival was the goal. Yet deep inside, I knew that one day, survival would not be enough. One day, I would need to find a way to break free. For now, though, I remained bound, a young woman living in the shadow of a man who mistook fear for respect and silence for victory. Life inside Harold's house moved with a rhythm of commands and criticisms that never gave me space to breathe. Each morning, I woke before sunrise, moving quietly through the kitchen to prepare breakfast because I knew the smallest mistake could spark another eruption. If the eggs were too runny, he scoffed. If the toast too dark, he slapped the plate back at me. His words cut deeper than the food thrown away. "You cannot even cook properly, Emma," he would say, "and yet you think you deserve to live here." Those sentences replayed in my head as I scrubbed dishes or vacuumed floors. For Madison, the world looked different. She glided through the house in new clothes, her nails painted at expensive salons, her weekends spent with friends in restaurants I could never afford. At 17, she had been handed the keys to a shiny used car, a gift from her father. At 22, she still lived like a pampered child, her phone buzzing constantly with messages, her closet overflowing. Harold showered her with approval, smiling proudly at her smallest achievements while glaring at me for existing. Each time I saw the contrast, it erased a little more of my identity. I was the unpaid maid, the invisible daughter, the constant reminder that my mother had lived a life before Harold. He resented that fact, and he made sure I felt it. His rules grew more rigid as months passed. "As long as you live under my roof, you follow my rules," he repeated as if it were a sacred law. His roof, his food, his house, his power. Never mind that my mother had bought the home years earlier with the remnants of my father's life insurance. Never mind that the walls still held pictures of my childhood before Harold ever appeared. In his mouth, the phrase became a weapon to erase history. My mother tried to soften his harshness. She would whisper to me when he was not around, "Just let him have his way, Emma. Do not provoke him. It will only get worse." Her eyes darted toward the living room whenever she spoke, as if even walls could carry her words back to him. Her fear was palpable. I knew she wanted peace, but the peace she chased was silence bought with my dignity. Over time, I grew accustomed to the cycle. It followed the pattern I later learned experts called the cycle of abuse. First came tension, a low simmer where every word and gesture was measured. Then came explosion, a slap, a shove, or in the most recent case, a bowl of soup hurled at my face. After the storm came a period of uneasy calm. He would act as though nothing had happened. Donna would move carefully around him, and I would nurse my bruises in silence. This repetition drilled itself into my bones. It made me flinch at sudden movements, made me shrink into myself at the sound of his footsteps. Sometimes he did not need to raise his hand. A glare was enough to make me stumble over apologies. Each insult reinforced the hierarchy: Harold, the Master Madison, the princess, my mother, the silent partner, and me, the unwanted servant. Day by day, the walls of that house pressed tighter around me. I wanted to believe I could endure, but endurance chipped away at my sense of being. Each command and insult felt like another brick in the cage. I thought about leaving, truly I did, but each time I weighed the options, the scale tipped toward despair. No income, no apartment, no backup plan. Student loan notices arrived in the mail piling up like small threats. Without Harold's roof, I risked the street. And if I left, what would become of my mother? He would turn his rage fully onto her. That knowledge kept me in place as much as poverty did. The abuse was not always physical. More often, it was words, tone, gestures. Sometimes he pinched my arm when passing by or pressed his hand hard on my shoulder when correcting me. Each act small enough to deny, but painful enough to remind me of my position. My mother told me he was stressed, that his work demanded much of him, that I should try harder not to upset him. But I knew better. It was not stress. It was choice. Harold chose control. Harold chose humiliation, and we had no power to stop him. Or at least that was what I believed back then. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how long survival could be my only goal. I dreamed of a future where my voice mattered, but the waking hours dragged me back into reality. The next morning, he would find another flaw. Madison would smirk. My mother would plead for quiet, and I would swallow my anger like bitter medicine. The pattern was set, and I was trapped inside it. The night of the soup incident replayed in my mind over and over until my thoughts became unbearable noise. I went to the bathroom, turned on the dim light, and forced myself to look in the mirror. My reflection shocked me. The skin on my cheek was red and blistering, my lips swollen, my eyes hollow from exhaustion. For a long moment, I simply stared, unable to recognize the woman looking back. Humiliation coursed through me, not only from the pain, but from the realization that I had allowed this to become my life. I thought about leaving, really leaving, but the list of obstacles came rushing in like a flood. Harold kept all my documents locked in his office drawer. My birth certificate, my passport, even my social security card were in his possession. He had claimed he wanted them safe. In reality, it meant I had no way to apply for housing or a job without him knowing. He also had control of my mother's bank accounts. She had given him full access, trusting his promises of security, so every dollar that came into this house passed through his hands. Without money, I could not even buy a bus ticket to get away. Then came the credit problem. I had graduated with a mountain of student loans and almost no payment history. My credit score was practically non-existent. Landlords in this city would laugh at an application without a steady job or a co-signer, and Harold knew it. He reminded me often that no one would rent to a broke young woman with nothing but debt. Finally, there was my mother. Donna had stood frozen that night, too scared to confront Harold. She depended on him financially and emotionally. If I left, she would face his anger alone. I could not bear the thought of him unleashing his full rage on her because I had abandoned her. Those reasons, stacked like heavy bricks, pressed me down until I felt glued to the floor. Survival required silence. Yet, as I stared at my burned reflection, I realized survival was not enough. I needed to find a way to fight back. Late that night, when the house grew quiet and Harold's snores echoed from the bedroom, I slipped into the corner with my phone. My hands shook as I searched for domestic violence hotlines, shelters for women, and guides on filing protective orders in the United States. Reading the words on the screen made my heart pound with both fear and hope. There were resources, people who might listen, people who could help. But hope was short-lived. A shadow fell over me, and Harold's voice cut the silence. "What are you doing up?" I fumbled to hide my phone, but he snatched it from my hand. His eyes scanned the screen and darkened with fury. He shoved the phone back against my chest and hissed that if I ever tried something like that again, he would have me declared insane. He threatened to call doctors he claimed to know who would sign papers saying I was unstable. He sneered that no one would believe a crazy girl who lived off her stepfather's charity. His words hit me harder than his hand ever could. The idea that he could erase my credibility with a single accusation chilled me. In that moment, I understood the depth of his control. He did not just want my obedience, he wanted ownership of my reality. After he stormed away, I sat alone in the dark, tears sliding down my face. I told myself I had to endure a little longer. If I moved too soon, if I confronted him without proof, he could destroy me with one phone call. I needed to be smarter. I needed to gather evidence. I needed a plan. But even as I tried to calm myself, the thought gnawed at me. How much longer could I wait before silence became permanent? The burn on my cheek throbbed with each heartbeat, a constant reminder that Harold had crossed a line I could never uncross. That night, for the first time, I stopped telling myself it would get better. I knew now that it would only get worse. Something inside me shifted. The fear was still there, but buried within it was a spark of defiance. I would not let him reduce me to nothing. One day I would make sure the world knew what kind of man he really was. That conviction was small, fragile, but it was enough to keep me alive. As I finally lay down staring at the ceiling in the dark, I whispered a vow only I could hear. This is not the end of me. This is the beginning of his end. The morning after the threat, I woke with my cheeks still tender and my body sore from tension, but a new determination had rooted itself inside me. If Harold wanted to control my reality, I needed to create my own record of the truth. I began keeping a secret notebook hidden beneath the lining of my mattress where I wrote down every insult, every threat, every time he raised a hand or used his power to belittle me. I recorded dates and times, carefully knowing one day this might matter. My phone became another tool. Whenever he shouted loud enough, I would discreetly press record and capture his words. When I caught a glimpse of my reflection, I took photographs of the bruises and burns, storing them in a hidden folder. These small acts gave me a sense of control. I was terrified he would discover my efforts, but the risk felt worth it. I could not fight back with fists, but I could fight back with evidence. A few nights later, Evelyn Ross, our 60-year-old neighbor, knocked at the door after hearing shouting through the walls. She had always been kind in passing, offering a wave across the yard or a polite smile. That evening, her eyes held concern. She asked if everything was all right. I forced a smile and lied that I had tripped while cooking my voice steady even as my heart pounded with fear that Harold might overhear. Evelyn frowned clearly unconvinced, but she let it go. Before leaving, she squeezed my arm gently and said that if I ever needed anything, her door was open. I nodded, grateful for her kindness, but too afraid to accept. Not yet. A week later, I went to the pharmacy to buy ointment for my burns. There, by chance, I ran into Ethan Brooks, a classmate from high school who now worked as a nurse at the local clinic. He noticed the marks on my skin immediately. His brow furrowed, and he asked softly if someone had hurt me. My instinct was to deny it, but the concern in his eyes made my throat tighten. I told him it was an accident with hot water, but he did not look convinced. He reached into his pocket, scribbled a number on a scrap of paper, and pressed it into my hand.
"If you ever need help, call me,"
he said firmly. For a moment, I felt the weight of secrecy lighten. Someone believed me without proof, someone offered help without judgment. I tucked the number into my pocket like it was a lifeline. Yet when I walked back into Harold's house, the fear returned immediately. His voice boomed from the living room asking where I had been. I muttered about running errands and hurried past before his suspicion could grow. That night, as I lay in bed with the notebook under my pillow and the paper with Ethan's number beside it, I realized I had begun my quiet rebellion. I still lacked the courage to go to the police. In truth, I did not trust the system fully. Stories circulated among women in town of restraining orders ignored of police who treated domestic abuse as a family matter. I could not risk Harold twisting the narrative to make me look unstable. His threat about declaring me insane still rang in my ears. That fear was real. But gathering evidence, keeping records, and holding on to the small network forming around me gave me something new hope. For the first time in months, I did not feel completely powerless. I knew the road ahead would be dangerous. I knew Harold's temper would only escalate. Yet as I closed my eyes that night, I repeated silently to myself that survival was no longer enough. I was preparing for the day when survival would transform into resistance, when silence would turn into testimony, and when Harold would finally face the truth he had spent years hiding behind the mask of respectability. On the surface, Harold Carter was a man who commanded respect. He wore clean-pressed shirts, shook hands firmly at church on Sundays, and always remembered to ask neighbors about their families. People called him reliable, the kind of man who took care of his household and made sure everything looked proper. That image was his armor. It was the mask that concealed the rot underneath. Whenever we attended a family gathering, Harold played the part of the attentive husband and caring stepfather. He would drape an arm around my mother's shoulders, smiling warmly while I stood nearby with makeup carefully covering bruises. Donna would echo his stories, repeating how hard he worked to provide how grateful she was for his stability. She had learned to survive by preserving the image he wanted, and I learned to stay quiet. Madison loved it most of all. She snapped photos on her phone, posting them online with captions about family love, Sunday dinners, or gratitude for her amazing dad. In every picture, Harold looked like a proud father and Donna looked like a supported wife. I was the background decoration smiling through clenched teeth. The comments rolled in from friends praising our perfect family, and each one felt like a knife twisting deeper into me. They saw a lie, but I lived the truth. Behind the closed doors, the performance ended quickly. Harold's face hardened, his words sharpened, and his temper controlled the air in every room. The smallest error drew his wrath. A towel folded wrong, a glass left on the counter, or a tone of voice he deemed disrespectful. Each mistake became an excuse for humiliation. He rarely struck me where marks could not be explained away. When he shoved me against a wall, he made sure my back carried the bruise hidden under clothing. When he slapped me, he told me to cover the redness with the expensive foundation he claimed was a gift. The violence was calculated. It was about control more than injury. He wanted me fearful, dependent, silent, and it worked at least for a time. My mother played her role, nodding along to his orders, never contradicting him in public, warning me in private not to antagonize him. She told me again and again that his reputation mattered to him more than anything. If I ever embarrassed him in front of others, she whispered we would both pay the price. That knowledge explained why she smiled in photographs and hosted dinner parties with forced cheer. Keeping up the image was her shield. For Madison, the mask was opportunity. She flaunted her father's generosity and enjoyed the car he bought her, the shopping trips, the endless praise. She treated me like a nuisance, occasionally reminding me that I was lucky to live under his roof at all. To her, I was an outsider in her kingdom, someone to mock when she needed to feel powerful. The cruelty never ended. Yet the hypocrisy of Harold's public mask infuriated me more than the bruises. Watching neighbors and relatives compliment him on being such a family man made me want to scream. They did not see him late at night when he hissed threats in my ear, when he warned me that no one would believe me if I spoke. They did not see the way my mother shrank into silence, the way my body flinched at his sudden movements. To them, he was a provider. To us, he was a tyrant. The duality of it all wore me down. Each time I saw his charm work on strangers, I felt my reality crumble further. Maybe he was right. Maybe no one would believe me. Maybe they would see only the mask and call me ungrateful or unstable. That thought gnawed at me, made me question my own perception. Gaslighting does that. It makes you doubt even the evidence of your own pain. But deep inside, I knew the truth. The mask was fragile, and one day it would crack. I did not know when or how, but I carried that thought like a hidden ember of hope. For now, I endured the show played my part and waited for the moment when performance would no longer protect him. The breaking point came on an evening that seemed ordinary at first. I had just finished cleaning the kitchen after dinner when Madison walked in with a glass of red wine. She laughed too loudly at something on her phone and brushed past me, leaving the glass teetering on the counter. I reached to steady it, but my sleeve caught and the glass slipped crashing to the tile floor and shattering into crimson shards. The wine spread like blood across the white linoleum. My heart froze because I knew what was coming. Harold stormed in within seconds, his face dark with anger. "You clumsy idiot!" he bellowed. "Do you know how much that glass cost?" I knelt quickly, stammering an apology, but his hand struck before I could finish. The slap cracked across my cheek, the same side still tender from the burn, sending me sprawling onto the floor. My ears rang, my vision blurred, and for the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. I had accepted humiliation, endured insults, hidden bruises, but in that moment something broke. My body moved on instinct. I scrambled to my feet, dashed to the corner where my phone sat charging, and with trembling hands dialed 3 numbers I had rehearsed in my mind 100 times but never dared press. 911. The operator's calm voice answered, asking for the nature of the emergency. My breath came in gasps as I said the words aloud for the first time. "My stepfather hit me. Please send help." Within minutes, flashing lights painted the walls through the windows. The sight made my knees weak with relief and terror. Harold's expression shifted immediately from rage to calculated composure. He straightened his shirt, wiped his hands, and prepared the mask he always wore for outsiders. Donna stood frozen, torn between fear of him and fear for me. Madison smirked from the couch, her phone in hand, as though this was just another show. The officers entered 2 men with steady eyes scanning the scene. They saw me with a red cheek and watery eyes, saw the broken glass on the floor, saw Harold standing tall with his arms crossed. They asked what happened. My voice shook as I repeated my claim. "He hit me. He threw the glass. He hurts me." But before I could say more, Donna's voice broke in. She said it was an accident, that I had tripped and cut myself. Madison chimed in too, laughing lightly, saying I was dramatic and clumsy. The officers exchanged a look, skeptical but constrained. They asked me again if I wanted to press charges. My courage faltered under Harold's glare, the memory of his threats echoing in my head. I managed only a whisper. "I just want it on record." They nodded and wrote an incident report, explaining that without clear evidence or a willing witness, they could not arrest him. They gave me a pamphlet about restraining orders and domestic violence hotlines. They told me I could apply for protection at the courthouse. Then, they left their lights fading down the street, and the house fell into heavy silence. Harold's mask slipped the second the door closed. He stepped toward me slowly, voice low and dangerous. "You think calling the cops will save you? No one believes you, Emma. Not your mother, not Madison, not even the police. Remember that." He brushed past me as though he had won again. But something inside me had changed. The report existed now, a mark in the system. My fear was still sharp, but for the first time it was paired with proof that my reality was not invisible. I clutched the pamphlet in my hand that night and stared at the words. Restraining order, my cheek throbbing, my chest tight. The police had not taken him away, but they had left me with something Harold could not erase. A record. And from that moment forward, I knew silence was no longer an option. The pamphlet from the officers sat on my nightstand for 3 days before I dared to read it in full. Every time Harold walked past my door, I shoved it beneath a pillow, terrified he might see. The words were dry and official, but hidden inside them was a map to freedom. Emergency protective order, temporary restraining order, court hearing. It all sounded overwhelming, but it was a process, and processes could be followed step by step. I knew I could not do it alone. The first person I trusted was Evelyn Ross, our neighbor. One afternoon when Harold was at work and Madison was out shopping, I carried my phone and my hidden notebook across the lawn. Evelyn opened the door before I even knocked twice. She had seen enough over the years to suspect something was wrong. When I showed her the photos of burns, bruises, and the short audio clips where Harold's voice cursed and threatened, her eyes filled with sorrow and then with steel. She told me she would stand by me as a witness whenever I was ready. Her assurance was the first anchor of safety I had felt in months. The second came from Ethan Brooks. I forced myself to visit the clinic under the excuse of needing ointment. Ethan was working that day, and when he saw the healing burns on my cheek, he asked no casual questions. Instead, he sat me down, examined me carefully, and wrote a medical report. He documented that the injuries were consistent with an assault involving hot liquid. He handed me the paperwork, quietly explaining that medical evidence carries weight in court. His calm professionalism steadied me. I tucked the report into my bag, a piece of truth that Harold could not manipulate. With Evelyn and Ethan's support, I finally took the pamphlet to the courthouse. My hands shook as I filled out the forms listing each incident, attaching photos, dates, and descriptions. The clerk guided me gently, not surprised by my tears. Filing for an emergency protective order meant Harold would be temporarily barred from contact until a hearing could determine further action. That day, I met Assistant District Attorney Brenda Johnson. She was in her mid-40s with sharp eyes that had clearly seen too many cases like mine. She listened as I told my story, flipping through my evidence with care. She did not promise miracles, but she explained the process clearly. First, the EPO, then the hearing where a judge could issue a longer order, then potentially criminal charges if evidence proved strong enough. She spoke of the challenges, the likelihood that Harold would try to present himself as the devoted stepfather, the possibility that my mother and Madison might testify against me out of fear or loyalty. Her candor scared me, but it also reassured me. At least she was honest. When she asked if I was willing to move forward, I felt the weight of the choice press down on me. Fear clutched at my ribs. I imagined Harold's fury, the way his face would twist if he discovered I had defied him. But then I thought of Evelyn's promise, Ethan's report, Brenda's firm tone. For the first time, I was not completely alone. I signed the petition. That night I lay awake, expecting Harold to burst through my door with rage, but he did not know yet. The order would be served soon, and then the storm would come. But this time I had a plan. This time I had allies. I understood now why so many victims stayed silent. The system was complicated, terrifying, and slow. But I also understood something new. Silence guaranteed nothing would change. Action, even trembling and imperfect, offered a chance. And with that thought, I clutched the copy of the protective order beneath my pillow, whispering to myself that survival had finally transformed into resistance. The day of the hearing arrived gray and cold, a morning that seemed to mirror the weight pressing on my chest. I stood outside the courthouse, clutching a folder filled with every piece of evidence I had managed to gather. Evelyn stood beside me, her presence solid and steady. Ethan had promised to appear as well with his medical report. My stomach churned, but I knew this was the day Harold's mask would be tested under the gaze of the law. Inside the courtroom, Harold sat at the opposite table in a suit and tie, his hair slicked back, his posture calm. He looked every bit the respectable stepfather he wanted the world to believe. Donna sat behind him, her hands twisting nervously in her lap, while Madison leaned back with a smirk, scrolling through her phone as if the outcome meant nothing. When the judge entered the room, Harold stood with practiced politeness. I remained seated, gripping the folder so tightly my knuckles ached. Brenda Johnson, the ADA, began by presenting the petition for a temporary restraining order. She spoke clearly, laying out the timeline of events I had written. She submitted photographs of my burns and bruises, the audio recordings where Harold's voice rang out sharp with threats, and the medical report Ethan had written confirming the injuries were consistent with assault. Evelyn was called to the stand. She adjusted her glasses and testified that she had heard shouting through the walls many nights, that she had seen me with visible injuries, and that she had always suspected I was in danger. Her voice was calm, her words precise. Watching her defend me filled my chest with gratitude. Ethan followed his professional tone, describing the injuries he had treated. He explained how the burns matched scalding liquid, not an accident as Harold might claim. His credibility as a nurse gave the evidence weight. Finally, it was my turn. I walked to the stand with trembling legs, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. My voice shook at first, but grew steadier as I spoke. I described the night of the soup incident, the sting of hot broth on my face, the sound of the bowl shattering. I described the daily insults, the slaps and shoves, the way Harold held my documents and controlled finances to keep me trapped. I told the court about the night I called 911 about the officers who had seen the broken glass and my bruised cheek, but could only write a report because my mother and Madison covered for him. As I spoke, Harold's eyes drilled into me, dark and furious, but I did not look away. For the first time, I faced him openly. His attorney tried to paint me as unstable, suggesting I exaggerated or invented claims to cover my own clumsiness. He pointed out that my mother had said I tripped, that Madison had never seen her father hurt me. But Brenda countered firmly, reminding the judge that victims often face silence from family members too afraid to confront the abuser. She emphasized that the consistency of the photograph's medical report and witness testimony built a pattern too clear to dismiss. The judge listened quietly, flipping through the documents, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up. "The court finds sufficient evidence of ongoing abuse," he said slowly. "A temporary restraining order is granted. Mr. Carter, you are prohibited from contacting or approaching Ms. Davis for the duration of this order." The words hit me like a wave. Relief, disbelief, fear, all at once. Harold's jaw tightened, his mask cracking for the briefest second before he forced it back into place. But the judge was not finished. He looked at Brenda. "Based on the evidence, this case warrants referral for criminal prosecution. The district attorney's office may proceed with charges of domestic assault and coercive control." The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs. Harold's mask slipped further. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering harshly, his face red with fury. Donna covered her mouth with a trembling hand, her eyes darting between him and me. Madison rolled her eyes, but her smirk had vanished. When the hearing ended, Harold was escorted out by deputies. He did not look back at me, but I felt the heat of his anger like a storm gathering. Evelyn squeezed my shoulder gently. Ethan gave me a nod of reassurance. Brenda leaned close and whispered, "This is just the beginning. We have a long road ahead, but today was a victory." Outside the courthouse, the air felt different. For the first time in years, I walked without fear of Harold at my heels. Yet I knew the battle was not over. A restraining order was paper, not a wall. Criminal charges meant trial testimony and more attempts by Harold to twist the truth. But the difference now was clear. I was not alone. The law was no longer blind to what happened in that house. The system had seen the mask and recognized the violence behind it. That night, I returned to Evelyn's house where she insisted I stay until the trial. I sat in her kitchen sipping tea, feeling the quiet warmth of safety. My cheek still carried faint scars from the burn, but inside, something new had taken root. Defiance. Harold had always said no one would believe me. Now, the judge had. Harold had said I was trapped forever. Now I had walked free of his control at least for a time. The road ahead would be difficult, but the first wall of his power had cracked. And for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a life beyond his shadow. The weeks following the hearing blurred together in a haze of fear and fragile hope. Harold was furious, that much I knew, but the restraining order forced distance. He could not call, could not appear at the door, could not use his usual intimidation tactics. Yet even with the paper in my hand, I jumped at shadows. Every car that slowed outside Evelyn's house made me flinch. Every unknown number on my phone made my stomach tighten. Trauma does not leave easily even when the abuser is physically kept away. Brenda reassured me that the district attorney's office was moving forward with charges. She explained the process step by step. There would be an arraignment where Harold would plead then pre-trial motions and eventually a trial unless he accepted a plea deal. He was facing felony domestic assault and coercive control charges that carried the possibility of years in prison. She warned me he would fight viciously. Abusers rarely surrender their power quietly. When Harold appeared for arraignment, he still wore his mask. He stood in the orange jumpsuit but held his posture like a businessman in a boardroom. He pled not guilty. His attorney claimed I was vindictive that I had fabricated evidence with the help of Evelyn and Ethan. But the prosecution had photographs, medical reports, audio recordings, and the 911. An incident report. The judge ordered him held pending trial. That night, I exhaled a breath I had been holding for years. Donna struggled in the aftermath. For decades, she had leaned on Harold for financial security. With him in jail, she had to confront the reality that she was both free and terrified. Brenda connected her with a counselor who specialized in battered spouse syndrome. At first, my mother resisted insisting she was fine, but slowly she began to admit her fear and dependency. Watching her begin therapy gave me hope that she might eventually reclaim her own strength. Madison took a different path. Without Harold's presence, she floundered. The car payments he had covered stopped. The shopping trips ended. She drifted away, avoiding both me and my mother. Perhaps one day she would understand the truth. For now, she chose distance. As for me, I moved into a small apartment across town with Evelyn's help. She co-signed the lease, trusting that I would manage once I found steady work. Ethan introduced me to a contact at the local clinic who needed clerical support. It was not glamorous, but it was honest, and it gave me enough to pay rent and start rebuilding. Healing did not come overnight. I woke often from nightmares, my skin prickling with the memory of soup scalding my face or Harold's hand slamming across my cheek. Loud voices made me jump, sudden movements tightened my chest. But therapy support groups and the simple act of living in a safe space began to mend the cracks. The trial came months later. The courtroom felt different this time. I walked in, no longer trembling folder in hand, ready to face him. Harold sat at the defense table glaring at me, his mask finally thin. Brenda guided me through testimony. I spoke calmly, presenting evidence describing incidents. Ethan testified again, firm and professional. Evelyn shared her observations with clarity. The jury listened. When Harold took the stand, his lies unraveled under cross-examination. Brenda asked about the photographs, the burns, the recordings. His answers contradicted themselves. His anger seeped through despite his attempts to appear composed. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Guilty. The judge sentenced him to 4 years in state prison for felony assault and coercive control. The gavel struck, and with it a weight lifted from my chest. Donna wept quietly in the gallery. I felt tears slide down my face, not just from relief, but from the validation that the truth had finally been recognized. In the weeks after sentencing, I began to piece together a life that felt like my own. I paid my bills with money I earned myself. I decorated my apartment with secondhand furniture that felt like treasures simply because they were mine. I cooked meals in my tiny kitchen without fear of criticism. Each small act was an assertion of independence. My scars remained faint on my cheek, reminders of what I had endured, but I no longer hid them. They were proof of survival. One evening, Evelyn sat with me on her porch, sipping tea as the sun set. She told me she admired my courage. I told her I had not felt courageous at all, only desperate. She shook her head and said that desperation can spark bravery. I believed her. Ethan stopped by often bringing groceries or checking in. His kindness softened the edges of my fear. Friendship grew slowly, naturally into something warmer. For the first time in years, I considered a future where trust and affection were possible. As months turned into a year, the nightmares eased. My mother grew stronger through therapy, learning to make decisions without Harold's shadow. We repaired our bond slowly, carefully, both of us acknowledging the silence that had once divided us. Madison remained distant, but that was her journey to face. On the anniversary of the night Harold burned my face, I stood in front of the mirror again. The scar was faint, but still visible. I traced it gently, remembering the pain, the humiliation, and the vow I had whispered in the dark. This is not the end of me. I realized then that I had kept my vow. Harold had been held accountable. My voice had been heard. My life was mine again. Justice is never instant. It is slow, painful, messy. But it is real. And for men like Harold, it is salty enough. To anyone listening who has been silenced, who has been told no one will believe them, I want you to hear me now. You are not alone. There is a path forward. There are people who will stand beside you, who will help you gather your truth and carry it into the light. I once thought silence was the only way to survive. Now I know that speaking out is the way to live. Have you ever fought for your own voice after being silenced? Share below. Your story matters.